I'm Hannah Cooper. I'm an IT business partner at the National Lottery Community Fund. So if go to you, Jag.
Thank you, Hannah. So Jag Sohal, I'm sure a lot of you know me already, IT Business Relationship Manager at NFU Mutual. I've been there for 2 years, but 12 months of that was maternity leave, so still fairly new. I like to play the new card still. But we're here just to talk about BRM driving culture change, and we felt as a working group just a really interesting topic, you know, as we're winding down towards the end of the year. So a bit of a reflective piece, you know, you might want to think about the culture, you know, in your organisations, at a team level or organisation level, and whether we're in the office or we're at home, we still get a sense of culture. Can't see it, but it's there. So, but it's a big word. So Hannah and I thought we'd start with just what our interpretation of culture change is. So I'm going to just go to Hannah and say, you know, what did we sort of come up with when we talked about this?
Yeah, so as Jag said, it was really interesting because when we picked this topic up, it was, you know, it's such a huge thing, and if you actually Google culture change, it's a topic within its own right. So trying to understand what to focus on in a 30-minute slot was an interesting conversation itself. So I think where it got to was essentially talks about what the important part of it is for us. So for me, the way I personally attribute culture change to is behavioural change. I know that sounds like a strange way to look at it, but actually just changing that language in your own mindset to understand where you're coming from is behaviour is very much driven by many factors. It's driven by upbringing, it's driven by values, intention, motive, all the things that come behind it. And actually those things are generally how you present yourself and what you expect from people around you, which then lends to culture. I think in the past, when I've worked on change programs and things, calling it behavioural change makes it easier to understand because you can demonstrate behavioural changes. Whereas if you say culture change, it's like, how do you actually demonstrate a change in culture? Whereas, you know, you can actually see people changing behaviours. So that's kind of my, and throughout the presentation, well, the conversation, that's how I'm going to be focusing and presenting on, which is my kind of belief around the behavioural piece. And I did kind of say to Jag when we were talking, I feel like, unfortunately, and it's such a valuable thing, that the phrase culture change has become a bit of a business buzzword. So people use it as either a way to try and push things or a way to, but actually it's remembering why you want to look at this area or not. So I'll pass over to Jag now about what she feels it is.
So really for what I was thinking about culture change is, or culture in general, is it's leadership driven for me, and it's how leadership respond in times of VUCA. So in tough times, when the backdrop changes, maybe it's a tough time for you as an individual or in the organisation, like a pandemic, you know, how did your company really respond? You know, what direction did they take to kind of lift you out of tough times? How did they listen? How did they really listen before, you know, rolling out a plethora of options to you? Of, you know, this is what you can do. Really listen to you as a team and individual and demonstrate that they've listened. And like I said, it can carry across in teams. So, you know, for example, our IT team, great example is hybrid working. So our leadership really quite flexible, really positive about, you know, hybrid working and arranging that agreement with your manager in terms of when you'll be in the office, you know, frequency more than anything, not prescriptive. Shift over to other areas, you know, in the organisation, and the climate's slightly different. You know, there's going to be a bit more of a check-in, check-out kind of approach coming, and really, you know, define in advance of what days you're going to be in, and that throws out the whole kind of potentially work life and family balance that you've got going. So it just varies a lot. Hence, I feel that, so leadership for me and culture is a demonstration of the leadership's EQ and not IQ. So when leaders are seeing, you know, variations in attrition and retention rates of staff, that's a great statistic, that's tangible. Are they really trying to do a measure of EQ in the organisation? And we're just not there yet. We just don't do it. But then again, you know, taking it back to BRM, I feel like BRM, you know, we are drivers of culture change. It's our approach that can have an impact across many, you know, cross-functional areas. So we can, as individuals, be leaders in taking the charge on culture. So Hannah, you had a great example where you kind of did, you know, make that kind of impact stepping into a new organisation. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so I hope you can all see me now. I've closed everything I can. So you might have noticed in the intro I've skipped over anything additional about me except my name, and that's because what I'm kind of going to talk about now is the fact that I was actually new to business relationship management, or, you know, I think from a terminology perspective, I'm going to stick to BRM just to make it easier. But in the National Osteoarthritis Community Fund, it was a brand new post when I joined just over 2.5 years ago. So really, it's to kind of talk about my experience in that, which was just in itself, and it links back to what Jag was just saying about the leadership team, just in itself, the leadership team making the decision to bring in this role is powerful in itself. And that is, you know, there was an organisation that wanted to actively improve how it worked with the rest of the organisation. So they made the decision to bring in the business relationship manager role. And I think just that in itself speaks huge volumes about the focus on culture and improvement of behaviours, which is taking IT from being the service provider, keeping the lights on, the thing that no one really understands how it operates, to be more connected to the rest of the organisation, understanding their priorities as well as our own priorities. And then understanding, you know, how people make their decisions and how we can support that, you know, working up to be that trusted advisor, strategic partner in the BRM maturity model. So that for me is quite a powerful thing, being new to a role. I think I have a slightly different experience when I've spoken to other people in the network and community, because, as I said, it was new to me. Before this, I was a project manager. So it's new as in a role, but it was also completely new in the organisation. So I've spent the majority of that time actually establishing what it is, and that is partly within my own team in IT, but also the rest of the organisation. So one thing that I have heard from a lot of people when I've spoken to them, when they talk about why they want this, it's, you know, to bridge the gap. That seems to be a common phrase. Bridge the gap, be the linchpin, you know, all of those things. I'm conscious there's many other things that BRM brings to an organisation, but those aspects for me are where those influential behavioural pieces can come into play, because by having a dedicated person, and, you know, we all know that as a capability, the aspiration is that it's embedded into culture, but to have a dedicated person who can pick up that role and go, okay, I'm not the person who's coding, I'm not the person doing the infrastructure and hardware, I'm not the person offering you direct support in terms of fixing your computer. It's a completely different aspect and dimension where you go, you know, I'm the person you can speak to about what you're planning, what you're feeling, what you're thinking, why you want to do what you want to do, and really understand where they're coming from. And I think, I can't remember, someone put it on LinkedIn or it was a post, but, you know, knowing the business as well as they know themselves. You know, there isn't any other role within the IT department that offers that. You know, you have your leadership team who sit in an SMT capacity, or a leadership who know the strategic plan, but to actually understand why someone drives what they do, why they want that decision, to then champion internally and support that, is within itself a change in behaviour. And I think the value that business relationship managers can add in that, of those interpersonal and business acumen skills, is a huge asset, and that's why it is probably a growing role and market. So that's, I think for me, that's might be my experience. I've gone from hearing nothing, like, you know, what it was before, obviously I wasn't here first hand to experience it, to what it is now. And it's using all of those things which my colleagues in the past have called fluff. But, you know, it's the fluff pieces, the relationship management part of business relationship management, which adds a different dimension that isn't necessarily experienced elsewhere.
Yeah.
So I'm going to stop there and pass over to Jackie, because one of the things that we spoke about in this area particularly was actually women in business relationship management and the kind of attributes that come with that. And I know this is a topic that Jag is really you know, passionate about, so I'm going to pass over to Jag to talk about it.
Thank you, Hannah. And I appreciate your comments there. You know, just being present, just to say, in a room full of leaders, we're here to represent IT. is incredibly powerful in an organisation. But then, yeah, going back to women in BRM, which I am passionate about, and it's great to see the audience today. There's a great, diverse mixed cohort today, and I think that just harks to BRM because, it's not a hard and fast IT title, is it? And the Institute would sort of align to that, business relationship management. And I think women do. I don't want to generalize too much, but we chatter, we make sure everyone's included, we collaborate well, we talk when the times are good, we talk when times are bad. And there's something around that kind of left brain, right brain activity as well. The fact that I know from my experience, I will come in with a more of a common sense and grounded thinking sometimes, whereas others are hard and fast into technical or damage control. I think I do take a step back, and maybe that's a woman in BRM being a mum maybe as well, negotiating with a 7-year-old to clean that part of the room. I'll clean that part of the room, getting deals done. And sometimes the office environment can be like, herding cats as well sometimes. So you do need that someone to say, hang on, we're going to do it this way. And that's the deal. So yeah, providing an emotional lens, an ethical lens sometimes as well. And we're akin to creating more deeper relationships as well. So that was just something I wanted to touch on, because I think that essence that we can bring is part of the positive culture that you would want to be in any place of work, I feel. Which then goes into something I hope we can all relate to, is around soft skills and hard skills. So the soft skills are around, building on your ability to be influential, a good communicator, negotiator, versus the hard skills, which is obviously the managing demand, the shaping of demand, workshopping and things like that, things on a job description. But then there's human skills, and I don't want people to be afraid to bring your human self into BRM, and that is the element around understanding when change is taking place in an organisation. How are you going to amp up your communication? How are you going to be more assuring to people? And the fact that you're, as a BRM, probably putting yourself out there to say, we're here to just meet with anyone, just so we can help in a human way. And yesterday I attended an internal conference with risk consultants for NFU Mutual. So they're out in the field usually. They haven't met each other for over 2 years. They do, site visits. It could be farms, it could be old buildings, and do 50 to 100 photographs a year. We've given them detachable Windows 10 laptops now. And of course, it's new technology. So when we were there yesterday with my fellow tech adoption colleague and a service colleague, we all got so much out of that session to meet these people and just give them the slightest little tweak or change to what is their day-to-day, to understand that their detachable device comes with screen lock. So when they are taking photos and scribing, when they're moving from portrait to landscape, it's not going to disrupt them as much, and cause that lag. That's a real problem. Interesting sort of keyboard shortcuts that even I, took away from the day. So again, that's us giving away, useful tips for them, which is just going to massively, change their ways of working. And that was a volunteer. I'm happy to attend and I'm happy to come along. And I think that's what the BRMs need to do. It's part of being visible, but also providing that help at a human to human level, I feel. So that was one point, and the other one is around going into an evergreen technology. So we need to keep up with the evergreen technology. That's the way we're going now, and it will have an impact on culture. So let's keep having those conversations about where technology is going with our business leaders, because if Microsoft throws out a change and we were aware of it and they weren't, we're going to have to be more vocal and more supportive of when these changes are now taking place. So we're going to go on to some real examples as well here. So Hannah, you had a really good example of behavioural change.
Yeah, so before I worked at the National Community Fund, I worked at a university. And I worked in a digital transformation program office. So one of the projects that and I think there's a lot of people in higher education here, so you'll empathise with this one, which is changing our virtual learning environment. So that's a huge thing for a university to do. It's one of their core business critical systems. It was particularly hard for us and important for us because the virtual learning environment that we had prior to making the decision to change was actually in-house built. It was one of the first ever VLEs in the UK HE market. So it was, you know, deeply rooted into the organisation and into the processes, and people had emotional attachment to our virtual learning environment. So one of the things in that role, I was actually an engagement communications officer, which now that I'm a business partner, I go, well, I was kind of a business partner actually. And in that, I think the one thing I picked up from it, and it comes back to kind of what we were saying earlier, is, you know, I wasn't a business analyst, I wasn't a system analyst, I wasn't a project manager, you know, I wasn't any of these roles that are already identified within IT for this. I was someone who met with all of the faculty deans and the leads and the Vice Chancellor's office who was sponsoring it to actually understand why they wanted to do the change and champion that and be the change agent within that space to understand how people felt. And it was from a culture change piece and a behavioural change. It was really interesting because one of the biggest things that we wanted to do was it wasn't just a system change, it was actually pedagogy led. So we wanted it to be, you know, business led rather than technology. But because it was being driven by the IT department, that was something that was quite hard to overcome. So what we ended up doing was meeting with everyone to go, well, how do you teach now? And it became less about the technology then. It wasn't, you know, how do we get rid of the technology and how do we move all of our data over and migrate and do all the other things? It was very much about how are you teaching now? How could we teach in the future? And it was really focusing on that outcome and the, you know, what we're expecting to get rather than the technology change. And by shifting the way the conversation took place, that presented a shift within how the project was delivered. And you know, from how BRMs can be involved in that, you know, everything from understanding the project, writing the business case, getting the scope correct, for example, you know, the risks associated, understanding that there is a human aspect to these kind of changes is something that's absolutely critical now moving forward. The, you know, the change of pace for technology means that people within tech can't keep up themselves most of the time. And I think having that appreciation that if we're struggling to keep up, that other people are also going to be struggling, and recognising that and supporting them through that journey. And I think that's one of my biggest examples. It's something I worked on for quite a long time. And, you know, the feedback that we got at the end of it was really good. It went from being you know, IT are forcing on us a change of a system that we love to being actually people were engaged. You know, there was a shift. And this was the fundamental moment for me in a behavioural and kind of change space, which was we went from almost begging, and I always went, you know, to be invited to people's meetings to talk to them about this, to them actively engaging us to attend. So it went from us kind of going, we want to speak to you about this, to people going, you know, actually, can you please come and talk to us about this? We understand it's going to have a change on us. And I think that is that's such a powerful thing. And that's something that business relationship managers have a huge role in supporting is, you know, changing the narrative around why we're doing things and articulating them in a way that means something so that people want to be engaged in the process. You know, the change curve is a brilliant, and I'm sure most of you have probably seen it, but the change curve is such a brilliant diagram to go, you know, you're going to have people at different journeys at different points, and recognising those. And something I mentioned to Jag the other day, Myers-Briggs is another one. You know, many a conversation about whether it's still relevant and if it's been debunked, I won't go there. But I think, you know, understanding that if anything you get from that is walking away and go, people are different. And you can't treat everybody how you want to be treated, but you can also appreciate and accept that people want different things and have different needs and adapt to that. And that is such an important skill that I feel that business relationship managers have in order to navigate an organisation's landscape. And Jag has a really good example about this in terms of actually bringing people together to have different types of conversations. So I'll pass over to you now, Jag.
No, thank you, Hannah. And I really like your example because the underbelly was still the same, wasn't it? The technical doodahs and everything else is happening, but that really important layer that made everyone else feel more included. So isn't it just so, you know, insightful to say that that was the you know, the crux of making it a success? So I really like that example. I suppose mine is you know, being in the BRM role and driving culture change. So if there's a climate of cost management, I would, you know, do something around that to help the organisation. But I suppose my example is the BRM doesn't always have to own all the culture change. So you might want to initiate something, but then I think there's a level around, well, how does this continue? How does this continue when I'm not here? You know, and I want it to flourish in the organisation. So the one example I did have was, if you imagine the CIO and his leadership are the SLT, senior leadership, making me and my fellow peers at my last organisation the ELT, so the extended leadership. And it was just in passing with a CIO that actually said to me in passing around, you know, get the ELT, you know, together. There's a lot of knowledge sharing that you could do. He then left, but I remember speaking to my manager about this, and I said, I think it's a really good idea, you know, and I feel like I've got capacity to do something around this. So fortunately enough, I think long enough in the organisation that I already kind of had that buy-in from the ELT, from my peers, really, to say, we're going to meet up. I can't remember the cadence now. I think it was monthly or maybe even bi-monthly at this stage. And we're going to have an ELT meeting, and we're going to touch on, you know, processes, people, engagement, you know, and any other business, almost a bit of a down tools moment for people, just to share what was going on in their space. So as real people leaders getting together, really. But boy, did it drive some really interesting results. So really insightful to know that, you know, the test team had the highest satisfaction results in IT. Test team and high satisfaction. How does that happen? Because they are, you know, constantly overwhelmed and bombarded with work. So that was really fascinating for that to be shared, and then us learning, you know. So there's a management, you know, style there that we need to really tap into. The fact that some of us knew what was happening in the portfolio and some didn't. So that was quite an interesting one. So if we're not all understanding the portfolio and how it impacts one another, you know, we're not aligned there as well. HR policies as well, how some of us were more in tune with HR, how we were applying some of these HR policies as well, versus those who felt like they might need to but didn't really know where to get started. So all these things are starting to tease out, really. So these meetings started to evolve, where we did have a speaker on the portfolio, and we agreed the action out of that was that the senior leadership, you know, would be communicating the portfolio to the leadership and on a regular basis. So that was one action. We had a HRBP run through policies and then take actions to work with certain individuals as well. I came across an event for Women in IT, a Tech Fest that was going to take place in London. Had I not communicated it early enough, you know, we wouldn't have got the early bird advantage. And the fact that we had a really good spread, because, you know, the comms said, everyone, I want you to pick, you know, one or two, you know, young aspiring or any aspiring IT woman in IT to come along. And they had a great cohort, you know, who went to London for a couple of days. What a great story, what great learning for everybody. And timesheet reporting was sort of flagging in some areas. So we had a better understanding of the importance of timesheet reporting and how we're going to be better and do better. So, and better in our well-being in general, the fact that we were all talking. So it really took off. But then I kind of wanted to then say, as a BRM, you know, I'm driving something really positive here. Now I kind of want to, you know, let it flourish. So I did hand it off to another manager as well. I had the conversation, happened to be the test manager, who was obviously doing a fabulous job with her team, to say, would you be in a position to continue with this while I work on other priorities now? And the fact that it was so well received and that it still takes place is, you know, just a great example of being joined up and for ITs, you know, breaking down silos within IT. So yeah, I thought that was a really good example to show in really today. So we're just going to wrap on another point around BRM as an organisational capacity. So I'm going to pass back on to Hannah.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting one. This is one that surprised me, actually, and I'm going to say this, that it isn't talked about more within BRM, or if it is, it's not something that's necessarily talked about as being actioned. So when I joined at the fund, one of the first things I said, so we already had IT business partners and finance business partners, not IT, sorry, HR, finance and procurement, but we didn't have IT. So I was a bit late to the party coming in, and I was like, well, there's already other business partners. So what are they doing? You know, how can I learn from them? How can we all connect with each other? You know, how can we work together? And it's something that I was quite keen to start when I got in. And it was to go, well, we're all having conversations, and this is organisational then, organisational stakeholder management, because you go, we're all having conversations with the same people about the same things in a way, but just from a different perspective. You know, talking about budgeting for the next year, which is your plans, talking about your resourcing, which is your plans, talking about the use of IT and the technology needs moving forward, which is the plans. So I got to a point where I was like, okay, let's start something. And it's really, really hard. And I will say this, it's really hard to find time sometimes when you are doing your day-to-day job, and I think all of us know our day-to-day varies drastically, but it's really hard to do the day-to-day and do the continual improvement piece. So it's a conscious effort to go, okay, I want to do something about this. So in September 2019, I established a business partner forum. And it was basically an opportunity for everyone who had business partner within their title across the organisation to come together and go, right, what are you all doing? What conversations are coming up? How's everyone feeling? The experience of that stopped because the pandemic, priorities changed, and we all had to, you know, heads down, hands down, everything. So I've re-established it now. So we've got to a point where as an organisation we started to settle a bit. So it's slightly smaller. So what we've decided to do is, rather than have it as a really large group of business partners, there's one nominated rep from each function, and we meet on a monthly basis, and our focus is still information sharing, but we've actually moved it onto how can we improve efficiency, how can we share, how can we be better for the organisation as a whole. And I think, again, that is something that's such a shift culturally and behaviourally to go, okay, let's understand each other's end-to-end processes. It comes back to what Jeremy was saying about frameworks. You know, how do we know what all of the other areas are doing, what processes they have? And one of the really critical things in that has been joining up with our strategic planning colleagues. So that's who the forum consists of. It's actually our strategic planning team and a business partner from each of the functions. And, you know, we've only had a few meetings. We're just still agreeing the terms of reference, but it's something that if you have that set up within your organisation, I would definitely encourage the sharing of knowledge between, because, you know, we're now also talking about, as we go into the planning cycle, how can we potentially piggyback on each other's meetings to stop people having to have the same conversation 5 times. So, you know, it's a beneficial thing for all of us in the room, because we get to hear from all aspects, but also, you know, the people themselves who are being met with don't feel as impacted. Anyway, I am going to stop there because I'm conscious of time and there's some questions.
So Fiona Taylor, I don't know if you want to add to what you've said, Fiona.
Yes, thank you. I will. I mean, I've enjoyed all of it so far, but we're in University of Sheffield, our BRM function. We're sort of in a position where we've got a change in leadership. We're having to sort of justify our value to our sort of exec team. And so I've just been scribbling everything that Hannah and Jag have said in my notes, because I think that just how you describe the value in terms of that sort of influencing change and supporting people through change, I think is just gold for what we need to do. And it is very hard. I think Jeremy put in there, it's hard to show the value of fluff. And I just think you've sort of articulated that so usefully. So thank you for that.
Fiona, I've got a good cost example. If, you know, there's a, you know, BRMs and cost management example as well, I could share with you. If you want to connect later, we can have a one-to-one.
Yeah, that would
support you as well.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Jag.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think both of us, we've got our LinkedIn details and things are on the agenda, so I'm happy for anyone to reach out as well.
Yes, I think I've just connected or pressed a button. So yeah, thanks both.
That's great. There's been loads of comments going on and lots of people saying how much they're enjoying the chats and all the examples you're giving. Thank you for being brave and coming up, Fiona. Anybody else going to be brave and come up, save my voice, so that Hannah and Jag can answer your questions? Yeah. Jane, lovely of you to say she loves your passion, drive and energy. I think we all do. That's absolutely brilliant. You know, really creating waves anyway. Super session both. Pez made a comment earlier up in the session that I made a note of. Pez, do you want to contribute now?
Just saying that, look, I think we should be incredibly proud that we've got such a diverse profession. I think we genuinely do have the most diverse profession in IT. I can't think of any others, apart from project management maybe, but even then, that isn't, you know, male dominated, for want of a word. So I think we've really got something special here, and I think it's our responsibility as a group to harness that and make sure that we celebrate diversity in all sorts, you know, demographics, but also our thought processes as well. I think we all bring something slightly different to the table, which is very unique. And I think Jag and Hannah's contribution today demonstrates that. So more of a thank you from me both.
Thank you, Pez. Very kind. Yeah, it's not an easy topic, but we got there. And I think, you know, you just touched on, Hannah, planning for the year and objective setting for the end of the year towards next year. So it'd be great if people can think about, well, how are we going to do something different? How are we going to bring in a partner forum or the ELT meeting that I suggested, or anything that could spark of ideas to say, you know, there's a good opportunity next year as we're going back to the office or whatever. Yeah, tap into that kind of positive culture.
Yeah, I think for me, it's something, you know, and I'm glad that people have found it helpful, because it's something I'm very passionate about, how change is managed. I think, you know, regardless of where you work, I think project management, change management is always the part that's an afterthought, and you know, so it's something that I do feel strongly about. I agree. Change isn't easy. It's not comfortable. It's not comfortable for anybody. You know, even the people who want it, there's uncertainty, there's risk, there's, you know, and I think the big one for me is, again, what's our intentions? And I think, as Petra said, it's so diverse. There's, in your head, you're probably thinking about planning, you're probably thinking about financial, you know, improvements, efficiency, you know, resourcing, protecting the resource that's within IT. You know, a lot of our thing I say when people say is, you know, it's about protecting resource, managing how things come in. And I think if you think about all of those, it becomes quite overwhelming. So it's actually going, well, what is your motivation for having conversations? What's the intent behind it? And as Jag just said, as we start to go into now new planning cycles, getting ready for new financial years, it is taking that step back and going, okay, how am I coming into these conversations? Because if you go in authentic in what your intention is, and if the intention is for the overall success of the organisation, then that comes through so strongly in building rapport and relationships with people. You know, if it's very much just I want to know what's going to happen to affect IT, you probably won't have the best conversation. And I've just put that there, you know, because people, it is very much the what's in it for me. And it's really understanding from everyone's aspect. And then that comes into that negotiation piece then. But Jag and I joked about it because it's a phrase that I love. And I didn't realise when I've said this to her, it's actually on her LinkedIn. But, you know, it's be the change that you want to see. If you want departments to work better with each other and closer with each other and see value in planning and being more prepared and being more transparent, you yourself have to have those principles and you have to demonstrate them actively. So I think that's my biggest kind of takeaway is, you know, if you want to see something, you've got to lead by example, and we're in a good position to do that.
Really brilliant words. We've got so many comments and we can't get to them all. I just want to quickly read out. David says, one of the more pleasantly surprising roles I had recently was to provide emotional support for a project manager who was having difficulties with conflicts between suppliers, tech and the business. Just listening and providing some perspective really helped them. That's such a great story and well liked in the chat there. Mick Little, you said, let me scrabble down there. Greg's saying IT seen as the value centre, not a cost centre. And Mick says, Hannah Cooper, those cross-functional meets are so important. Disappointed at my organisation that the transformation office has actually made their business partners redundant in favour of having a single centralised function. As I say, we will come back for the networking. We can catch up and chat with each other, but I think since we stole your break, we do need to give you back lunch.